I don't really hear people talking about this book a lot, and it's really great. A new release that I am very excited for. Hello and welcome to the Ellen Made Book Club. Today I wanted to talk about the Historical Fiction Readathon 2025 and give you some recommendations and ideas for the reading event, and also talk about some books that I'm interested to read that are also historical fiction. The Historical Fiction Readathon takes place during the month of June, and it was created last year by Shelly at Shelly-ish, and she's hosting it this year as well, but now she also has 4 co-hosts. And these 5 hosts all provided a prompt each, and they are as follows. The first one is from Shelly at Shelly-ish, and that is to read a historical book about a real remarkable person. The second prompt is from Charlotte at Shelly Reads, and that is to read historical fiction about the arts, so theater, film, painting, architecture, music. The third prompt is from Melinda at A Web of Stories, and that is to read a historical fiction novel with an alternate history, or like an alternate historical fiction novel. The fourth prompt is from Brittany at Literarily Smitten, and that is to read historical fiction with a dual timeline. And then the fifth prompt is from Gloria at Gloria C. Thompson, and that is to read historical fiction about a specific event. So I'm going to go through the prompts one by one and give you any recommendations that I have, and also any books that I am interested to read myself for the prompt or just in general. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to throw in some extra, just general historical fiction recommendations that might not necessarily fit any of the prompts, but you don't have to read books for the prompts. You can just read any historical fiction novel, and then you have participated in the event. That's all I need to say, I think, and let's get started. So for the first prompt, to read a book by a real remarkable person, I recommend The Mayor by Angharad Hampshire. If you have been watching my channel before, that's no surprise. This was one of my favorite books from last year, and I have been mentioning it many times. But yeah, I do think that it's a remarkable story and that it's a very relevant book to read in today's political climate. This follows a woman who worked as a concentration camp guard in Nazi Germany. She escaped after the war and married an American and moved to the US. And her husband had no idea about her past. He just thought she was a prison guard and nothing else. But she did some horrible things, and one day a journalist from the New York Times comes knocking, and her history is sort of exposed, and that just sort of catches up to her. She is not a remarkable person in a positive sense, but yeah, it is an interesting story and a fascinating look at both her and also her husband's perspective and how they deal with this situation. This would also count for the prompt dual timeline and also specific event, as in the Second World War. My second recommendation for this prompt is Isola by Allegra Goodman. This is a new release, and I listened to this on audiobook and really enjoyed it. It follows a French noblewoman in the 1500s, I think, something like that. She comes from a wealthy family, but her parents have both died, so she is assigned a guardian. And he takes advantage of her wealth, and she doesn't have any control over her resources or her time, or she can't really make any decisions for herself. She ends up going with this guardian on a ship, and she has a relationship with one of his men, and they end up being left on a deserted island very far north, off the coast of Canada, and just left there to survive if they can. It's a suspenseful story, and you have this perfect mix of historical fiction set in the sort of wealthier environments in France, upstairs downstairs dynamics, and the woman sitting there wondering what to do with her life, and then you also have this survival story, which is very much like you're on an island and what do you do to survive. And I thought it was great and highly recommend that one as well. I don't think I have a book that I want to read for this prompt just yet, so I'll just move on to the second prompt, which is to read a book about the arts. So for this prompt, I would recommend The Muse by Jessie Burton. This would also fit the dual timeline prompt. This is set in London in 1967 and in Spain 1936. And this has a lot of different themes. There's family and romance and war and art. The main character in London in 1967 is called Odell, and she gets a job at an art gallery. And at this art gallery there is a painting, this masterpiece that has a secret history, which we find out more about in the past timeline in 1936 in Spain, where we follow Olive, the daughter of a renowned art dealer. So there's a lot of art in this, and the painting plays a very central role in the story. And yeah, it takes place in an art gallery, and you know, there's lots of art in this. It does have serious themes, but it's not super heavy. It is quite long, or it's like, yeah, a little over 400 pages. It's not my favorite Jessie Burton. I liked The Miniaturist even better, but this one is also a good option, and especially if you want something about art. My other recommendation for this prompt is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. We follow a woman who is the star of her time in Hollywood. She's an actress, and we follow her through the making of different movies, and we also follow her love life, or like her different relationships with people in her life. And so we go through the decades and her 7 husbands, and it's very good. The next prompt is to read an alternate historical fiction, and I couldn't think of one that I have read, so I'm just going to mention 4 books that sound interesting to me. And the first one is a book that I was supposed to read last summer but didn't. And that is Ours by Philip B. Williams. This takes place in the 1830s in Arkansas, and there are enslaved people there, and then there is a woman who has some kind of supernatural power that enables her to create some kind of a bubble around the town, like a protection around it, where she brings people who have been freed from slavery, or she frees them from slavery and brings them to this sort of safe space. And then there's some sort of discussion around what it means to be free, and you know, if there are new constraints or new limitations within this bubble town. This is on my TBR. It's haunting me. I want to read it. So maybe this summer is the time, and maybe this event will get me to finally read it. The next book I think is alternate historical fiction, and that is The Book of Guilt by Catherine Chidgey, which is a new release that I am very excited for. I'm not 100% sure, but I happened to see something which I hope isn't a spoiler, and so I won't mention it, but I think that history has been altered to make the scenario for this book, and that's all I'm gonna say. It is about 3 boys, 3 triplets, who are in a sort of home, like a government home, where there are 3 mothers, Mother Morning, Mother Afternoon, and Mother Night, and they get all of their education from the Book of Knowledge, and all of their sins are recorded in the Book of Guilt. And it's a dystopian novel, if that doesn't come across, and it sounds very weird and very interesting to me. I am very excited to read that book. Another new release that fits this prompt is 10 Incarnations of Rebellion by Vaishnavi Patel, who is the author of Kaikeyi and other books about Hindu mythology. And this book is also sort of structured or like based from mythology, but it also imagines an India that was never independent from Britain, or like the British didn't leave. So that's an option. And then I also thought of 11/22/63 by Stephen King, which is also a book that's on my radar and that I think would fit this prompt. The fourth prompt is to read a book with a dual timeline, and like I mentioned, The Mare by Young Red Hampshire and The Muse by Jessie Burton both could work for this prompt. I also want to recommend The Maiden by Kate Foster, which was another one of my favorites from last year that I have mentioned many times. But yeah, I just really enjoyed this one. This is set in Scotland in 1679, and it follows a woman who is charged with the murder of her lover and sentenced to be beheaded. So that's one timeline, and then we go back 1 year to see what happened. We follow that sort of relationship between her and her lover and her other circumstances, and to sort of try and find out if she's really guilty. She claims that she's not. And there's also another character, another woman who might also be a suspect. And yeah, we get these two perspectives from the two different women. And I just think this is very entertaining in terms of historical fiction. It's very historical and very focused on like the women's experience of this time and situation. But there's also this like murder mystery, and there's romance, and there's it's funny, especially the other character is a very strong character, and yeah, she brings a lot of flair to the story. And yeah, I think this was a very enjoyable read, and so I highly recommend this one. Another historical fiction novel with a dual timeline that I would recommend is Red Clay by Charles B. Fancher. This came out in February this year, and I listened to the audiobook, which was fantastic. It's narrated by Dion Graham, who is a very talented narrator, so I would highly recommend that. This story is about a man called Felix, who was born into slavery in the US, and we follow him from the age of like 8 or 10 or something like that, I think. His parents are enslaved, and he lives with them on a plantation where they work. And we also get to meet the white owner family. I thought this was so well written, and it was also very interesting because this sort of takes place at the end of the Civil War, and so it follows this family as slavery ends and what happens then and what new problems arise in that sort of time period. It's a hard read, but it's also, there's also joy in there, and also like relationships and a lot of just interesting dynamics. And I don't know, I don't really hear people talking about this book a lot, and it's really great. It's also based on the author's own family history. And yeah, I think it's really worth a read. So let's move on to the fifth and final prompt, which is to read a historical fiction novel about a specific event. This one is a little bit tricky, I think, because you could say that The Maiden is about a specific event. This is based on a true story where a woman was sentenced to be beheaded, and you know, that is a very like singular event. The beheading of someone takes place in one day. And then we have events like wars that go on for years, and that's also a specific event. But you know, the story might span decades. And so yeah, and I think a lot of historical fiction centers around wars. So there are some wars that are the specific events in this pile of books that I'm going to mention. And so yeah, so the first book that I want to recommend is Crooked Plow by Itamar Vieira Jr. Just like Red Clay, this also takes place after the abolition of slavery, but this one takes place in Brazil. It's a Brazilian novel translated from the Portuguese, and yeah, I just highly enjoyed this novel and would very much recommend it. It follows two sisters, and at the start of the book they cut their tongues with a knife that they find under their grandmother's bed. And one of the sisters, her tongue is completely cut off, so she can't speak. And this sort of creates a very special bond between these sisters where the other sister sort of speaks for her. And so, yeah, we just follow them through their growing up and adulthood. And yeah, there's also this commentary about slavery having ended. And so I wouldn't say the book is about a specific event, and the event in that case would be the abolition of slavery in Brazil. But that is sort of in the background, and it does play a bigger part toward the end of the novel. And yeah, I think this is a very I just think this book is worth reading. It's really good, and I also want to just like recommend some books that don't take place in the US or in Britain. You know, there are other places in the world that have history and that have historical fiction, and so yeah, this is one of them, and I would very much recommend it. And in that vein, I would also mention The Mountains Sing by Nguyen Phan Huy Mai. This takes place in Vietnam, in Hanoi in 1972, during the war. And there's a little girl and her grandmother is trying to sort of distract the girl with stories. And from what I can understand, she's telling the story of their family. And so this book, the story in the book spans decades before that and like through the 20th century in Vietnam. So this is not like maybe about a specific event, but it takes place during the war in Vietnam. And so that's the specific event that I'm going to count this for. This is a very well-liked book, and I'm a bit intimidated by the emotion of it, but I think it's really good, and yeah, one that I just wanted to mention. Another book that I would like to read is River Spirit by Leila Abulela. This takes place in 1880s Sudan during the Mahdi War, I think it's called. I know very little about the history of Sudan, so this would hopefully fill in some gaps in that regard. But we're following a girl called Akuani. She and her brother are orphaned in a village raid, and then they're taken in by a young merchant who vows to care for them. We follow Akuani through her life as she is sold from house to house, and she has this merchant as a lifeline every now and then. But yeah, there's a lot of struggle and the war, and then these people who are self-proclaimed Mahdis. And yeah, it says that it's a powerful tale of unshakable devotion to a cause, to faith, and to the people who become family. I think this sounds very interesting, and I'm interested in reading it. And then I have two more books for this prompt, and they're both set in the Second World War. The first one is HHHH by Laurent Binet, who I think is a French author. And this is translated from the French as well, I'm pretty sure. Yes. And this, I'll just read off the back of this. Prague, 1942. Two Czechoslovakian parachutists sent on a daring mission by London to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich, chief of the Nazi secret services. His boss is Heinrich Himmler, but everyone in the SS says Himmler's brain is called Heydrich, which in German spells out HHHH. And then it says, all the characters in HHHH are real, all the events depicted are true. It is a work of fiction, but yeah, it's based on history. And this has been very highly praised. It's supposed to be really good. I imagine it's a tough read as well, but yeah, I'm very intrigued to read this one. And the other book that takes place in the Second World War that I thought of is The Lilac People by Milo Todd. This is a new release this year, and it is about trans rights and the history of that. It's set in Germany, and it follows a trans man, and then there is another trans man, I think, that sort of arrives at the farm where he's hiding, and he's also wanting to hide. And then what happens after the war when the Nazis are defeated, but there are still other people who are not very kind to trans people. That was a very rough explanation, but I think that that book sounds very interesting and good, and yeah, that's one that I thought of as well and wanted to mention. And then I have a few honorable mentions, I guess. 2 books that I can recommend. The first one is Pachinko by Minjin Lee. This follows a family over the span of like decades who are Korean immigrants in Japan, also, you know, during the 20th century and during wartime and all of that. It's an emotional and sort of sad, like heavy read, but it's also very good and very informative, and yeah, recommend this. Another book that I would recommend is Homegoing by Ya Jassy. At first I had this as an option for the dual timeline prompt, but I don't think it really fits, so I'm moving it to this general historical fiction recommendations section. Homegoing is an epic novel that spans 300 years in Ghana and the US. It starts with 2 half-sisters, Effia and Essie, who are born into different villages in 18th century Ghana. One of the sisters, Effia, is married off to an Englishman and lives in comfort in Cape Coast Castle. And unbeknownst to her, her sister Essie is imprisoned beneath her in the castle's dungeons to be sold into slavery and shipped off to America. So one thread of the story follows Effia's descendants in Ghana, and the other thread follows Essie and her children in America up until present day. It's a very heavy and difficult read, but just as important and very well written, and one that I would highly recommend. Another book that is a lot lighter is Mrs. England by Stacey Halls. This is about a woman working as a nanny or like a children's nurse in Britain somewhere, West Yorkshire, 1904. And Mrs. England is the mother in the family that she comes to work at, and there's something not right in this household. And so this nanny is trying to figure out what's going on. This is a bit on the lighter side of historical fiction. It's not super dense, it's not super serious like Second World War, but it's still an intriguing story, and yeah, I would recommend this one as well. And then 2 books that I'm interested in reading. The first one is Ghost Town by Kevin Chen, which is set in Germany, I think, and Taiwan. Hi, sorry, I didn't explain this book very well at all, so let me try to fix that. This story is about Chen, the only son of a traditional Taiwanese family with 7 daughters. He runs away from the oppression of his village to Berlin in the hope of finding acceptance as a young gay man. The novel begins a decade later, when Chen has just been released from prison for killing his boyfriend. He is about to return to his family's village, a poor and desolate place, and with his parents gone, his sisters married, mad, or dead, there is nothing left for him there. As the story unfurls, we learn what tore his family apart and the truth behind the murder of his boyfriend. Told in a myriad of voices, both living and dead, and moving through time with deceptive ease, Ghost Town weaves a mesmerizing web of family secrets and countryside superstitions, the search for identity, and clash of cultures. I think it sounds very interesting, and so I would be interested in reading that. And then the other book is Amma by Sarai de Silva, and I'm just going to read what it says on the description of this because I did not explain it very well. It says, 1951 Singapore. 10-year-old Josefina kills her abuser. This event becomes the defining moment in the lives of Josefina, her daughter Sithara, and her granddaughter Annie. The effects cascade through generations as Annie sets out across the world to discover what happened to fracture her family. Set in Sri Lanka, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, and London, Amma is a novel about how the past lives with us forever and wherever we are. I've had this book on my radar since last year, and then it was nominated for the Women's Prize this year, and so that made me want to read it even more. Did that fit a prompt? No, those were books that didn't fit prompts. Okay. Good. I hope you found some recommendations or ideas or inspiration for reading historical fiction. Let me know if you have also read any of these books and what you thought of them, or if you have any other ideas for the prompts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next one.